Good afternoon. This is Marietta Clausen again. And we are now on the last session of the afternoon. And I am very, very happy to introduce you to Professor Ankebe Kruger. She's from the Northwest University, and her topic is Achieve Peak Performance in Sport. But before she presents, I want to introduce her. Professor Ankebe Kruger is currently Associate Professor and Senior Psychologist at the Center for Health and Human Performance, that is in Psychology and Well-Being, at the Potchefstroom campus of the Northwest University. She conducts applied research, lecturing in the Psychology Master's Program, and doing psychotherapy. She completed her PhD in Sports Science in 2006 from the Northwest University and a second PhD in Psychology at the Northwest University in 2020. She was a lecturer in the School for Biokinetics, Recreation and Sports Science till 2008, and then she was promoted to an associate professor in 2014. As a registered counseling psychologist, Ankebe has been working in elite clinical sports psychology with various teams ranging from school to national level. She has published 34 scientific articles in accredited peer-reviewed academic journals and supervising a number of master's and doctorate students in the sports psychology field. And I am, as I said, very happy to be able to introduce her, because I think I played a role in motivating her to become a registered psychologist that specializes in sports psychology. So thank you, Professor Kruger.
Thank you very much, Marietta, and thank you for the kind introduction. So I'm going to speak or skip the who I am. So in today's presentation, I'm going to cover pressure in sport, the anxious brain. I'm going to speak a little bit about challenge versus threat states, and then what determine a challenge state, and then we're going to dive into the mental skills to get into a challenge state, and then we will conclude. Okay, so with regards to pressure in sport, pressure is a word that is often misused in sport, and it is actually nothing more than a product of our imagination and very often a self-imposed experience that we create for ourselves. So if an athlete is likely to become or to experience pressure, it is more than likely because he or she perceives that there are expectations placed upon them. So, however, similar to pressure, expectations are only imaginary projections about the future. So, athletes will most likely become feeling pressurized when they imagine the outcome of the sport. So, we often see a fear of failure tied to pressure. So, that might be examples such as a fear of disappointing others, a fear of embarrassment if I underperform, a fear of losing my place on the team, or even a fear of not performing perfectly or making mistakes. So we all know that there are a lot of uncertainty in sport and during our performance. And we often see that there are gaps between what we believe we can achieve and what we think we must achieve, with the emphasis on the must achieve. And so if we create expectations for ourselves, or even take on board somebody else's expectations on us, we post a target for ourselves. And as soon as we become unsure, or if we are not sure whether we will be able to achieve this target, we may start to doubt ourselves in our minds. So I'm quickly going to have a brief discussion about the anxious brain and its relation with doubt that we might experience. So We all have a built-in alarm system in our brain, which was originally designed to keep us safe during times of danger. But this part of the brain can become so confused that it can start to misidentify safe information as dangerous. So as we mature, our brain learns to set off this alarm for a huge variety of triggers. And some of these triggers are really dangerous, it's real triggers, but also some may represent no objective danger on its own. So for many people, certain animals, there you go. Locations, voice tones, and even social situations can develop the capacity to set off this alarm in our brain. So even emotional reactions such as anticipating rejection, so say for instance you start thinking, what will my coach or teammates or friends say if I underperform, or even having doubts, can set off this alarm. And you would remember that I said in the previous slide that if we create expectations for ourselves or even take on board somebody else's expectation, we set a target for ourselves. And when we are not sure if we be able to achieve this target, we may start to doubt ourselves, and this doubt can even set off the alarm system in our brain. So let's have a quick look at the alarm system in our brain. So this response is sometimes called the stress response, or even the fight or flight response, or more accurately, the fight, flight, or freeze response. So this response, or this alarm system, sets up our brain or our body to go through a whole series of arousals, which all are very helpful when we are in real danger. These responses might include, amongst others, the release of adrenaline and increased heart rate, changed breathing, hypervigilance to possible dangers, tunnel vision, and a host of other perceptual changes. So one might experience this series of arousals as a sudden experience of fright, fear, or anxiety. So the alarm system is situated in our amygdala. So it's a very small part in our limbic system, which is almost the size of a walnut, and it was originally designed for primitive survival. So in situations of real danger, such as a car speeding towards you when you cross the road, these series of arousals are actually helpful because the amygdala was originally created or developed to keep us safe and to save our lives. So it responds very rapidly to protect us from threats. But on the other hand, if your amygdala sets off this alarm system in your brain in response to a harmless thought, so that doubt I referred to previously, your alarm response is also activated, and you also experience the same sudden fear and anxiety with the accompanied arousal, the physiological responses, as if your life is in danger, where in fact there is in reality no danger to your life. So our brains are wired so that the amygdala received one message from two distinct pathways. So whenever your senses notice a possible danger, so say for instance, you look at an opponent you lost against in a previous game, your amygdala gets two messages from about this possible danger. So from your senses, the information goes to the switchboard in your brain, which is called the thalamus, and whereafter the same message gets sent with two different pathways, so two distinct pathways. So the one pathway is very rapid and direct to the amygdala, and the other pathway is a bit longer and goes through your cortex, or the thinking part of our brain, and then the message gets to the amygdala. So this longer path through the cortex takes about a half second longer than the direct path from the thalamus to the amygdala. So this slower path, or through the cortex, the thinking part of your brain, that allows us to think or to process the meaning of the message. But because the slower path takes a bit longer, your amygdala gets triggered before it gets the message from your cortex or your thinking brain that it is actually not a life-threatening situation. So after about only a half second later, your amygdala gets the message from your thinking brain that it actually is okay. It's not a life-threatening situation and all is clear. But on the other hand, so say for instance your thinking brain can, instead of telling your amygdala that all is clear, can tell your amygdala that there is in fact something to be frightened about. So in that case, your amygdala would keep on triggering the alarm system in your brain and would continue activating the alarm as long as the cortex is sending the message to the amygdala that something is wrong, there's a threatening situation currently happening. So say, for example, you reacted with a sudden anxiety or fear to a thought, what if I mess up in this game? Then you may start to think, okay, the coach will drop me for the next game. I will look like an idiot. What will people think of me, etc., etc. So these are the inner voices or the self-talk that keeps the anxiety going. And your amygdala, fueled by these inner voices or self-talk, continues to activate the alarm, and you continue to be anxious in a situation that actually poses no objective threat to your survival. So I wanted to use this explanation to show you that pressure in sport actually comes from within and not from external factors, and that our perceptions of our ability to meet a certain criteria or certain expectations might lead us to having some doubt about our abilities and activating the alarm response, leaving us with a feeling of fear in the face of a situation that actually is not really dangerous. So now that you know what happens in the brain and the body if the stress alarm is activated based upon certain perceptions when we experience pressure, it is important to know that there are two ways that we can react to this pressure. The one is good for performance and the one is bad for performance. These two responses have been referred to as a challenge state and a threat state. So research across various sports with both elite and non-elite athletes showed that individuals approaching a pressure situation in a challenge state performs better than normal, and when they approach a situation in a threat state, they perform usually worse than normal. So a challenge state reflects a positive mental approach to pressure situations where our mental resources meet the demands of the situation we are in. So the body reacts to this mental approach with an increased heart rate, an increase in the amount of blood pumped from the heart per minute, and a decrease in the vascular constriction from normal resting levels. So that means that blood is efficiently delivered to the brain, which is highly important for mental functions such as concentration, decision-making, as well as controlling one's thoughts and emotions. A threat state, on the other hand, reflects a negative mental approach to pressure situations where our mental resources do not meet the demands of the situation. So the body reacts to this mental approach again with an increased heart rate, but this time with a decrease in the amount of blood pumped from the heart per minute and an increase in the vascular constriction from normal resting levels. So in other words, although the heart rate increases, because of this increased vascular constriction, the amount of blood pumped from the heart is largely unchanged. So this means that the delivery of glucose and oxygen to the brain and muscles is inefficient. It's not helping you to perform at your best when it matters most. So we all know that the brain needs glucose and oxygen to function properly. So for instance, to make effective decisions. So the more efficiently you can deliver these substances to the brain, the better you'll be able to focus, make effective decisions, and also to be able to control your thoughts and your emotions in crucial pressurized situations. So now that we know that the challenge state is the better of the two, you might ask yourself the question, okay, how do I get to a challenge state? So first I want to describe the determinants of a challenge state. So any performance begins with a certain situation, and this might be, say for instance, a friendly match. It might be a penalty shootout in a game, the final round of a golf tournament, an Olympic final, or one of many other performance situations you may face within your sport. The second step is your philosophy surrounding success and failure. So for you, say for instance, success is a must and failure is awful, or in contrast perhaps, success is preferable and failure is bad, but it's not unbearable. The third step in this equation is when the demands of the situation are processed. So meaning that we evaluate the level of uncertainty, because nothing in life is actually certain, the required effort, as well as the danger. And with danger, I mean the possibility of physical danger participating in your sport, but also danger to your self-esteem. Say, for instance, if you lose, what will other people say? The fourth step then comprises of an evaluation of the resources available to us in this performance situation. And for the context of this presentation, the resources refer to self-confidence, control, and achievement goals. So based on these first four steps, your body responds accordingly. You'll remember from the previous slide the anxious brain and the accompanied physiological reactions that will lead you to either experience negative or positive consequences in your sport. So the important part in this equation then is, if the demands of a performance situation outweigh our resources to our that we have, then a threat state will occur. And on the other hand, if our resources outweigh the demands of the performance situation, then a challenge state will occur. So it's quite obvious that in this equation, to get into a challenge state is to enhance our resources at our disposal. So as I said, for the context of this presentation, the resources will be, that I'm going to discuss, will be self-confidence, control, as well as achievement goals. So with regards to self-confidence, research clearly and consistently demonstrates that self-confidence is one of the most important sport psychological factors relative to outcome in sport performance. So together with an increased confidence, athletes that are confident set challenging goals for themselves. They perceive a pressure situation as a challenge rather than a threat. They keep persisting in pursuit of their goals. They work hard despite of adversity, and they also behave more assertively, all of which contribute to superior performance in sport. So visualization, or sometimes referred to as imagery, is a powerful confidence-boosting technique and strategy that can be used by athletes. So by imagining yourself in demanding situations as realistically as you can, the brain starts to respond in a similar way as if you were actually facing that demanding situation without being in that situation. So very important to keep in mind is when you use visualization, you must try and use and incorporate as many of your 5 senses as possible, namely what you see, what you feel, what you touch, what you see, hear, and taste, and even what you smell. So I'm briefly going to allude to 3 strategies that one can use to enhance your confidence for an upcoming high-performance situation by using or making use of imagery or visualization. The first technique is what we refer to as the highlight reel. So that means it's all about creating a cinematic experience for yourself in your mind where you experience various best performances back to back. It's like watching the sport replays on the TV. So you include only the most important aspects and crucially, only the aspects of performance that you want to recreate in future. So this is not the time where you correct mistakes. This strategy can be a very powerful self-confidence booster as it serves as evidence that you have been successful many times in the past and therefore you can do it again. The next technique is real-time best performance. So this strategy requires you to think of one best performance where your performance was at its best and you were successful. So take note, this is not about visualizing a lot of situations like in the previous technique, but more about focusing on one great performance where you were successful. So when you can imagine this event, recalling as many specifics as possible and using as many as your 5 senses as possible, then try and write a brief narrative or a story for this specific situation, again, with as much detail as possible. So recalling your thoughts, your behaviors, as well as your feelings. Thereafter, you're going to practice this script until you can imagine this scenario with your eyes open or closed without the need of a script. The specific real-time elements of a performance situation help your brain to build a mental blueprint of best performances, boosting your confidence and also making success more likely. You can use this real-time best performance technique whenever you feel appropriate, whenever you need to boost your confidence, typically in the lead up to a competition. As an alternative, you can also record this script onto, say, for instance, an MP3 player, your phone or a tablet, for use during quiet times or on your journey to competitive venues. So the better you embed this technique into your way of thinking, the better you'll become at visualizing and the better it will be for your performance in the end. And then the next technique is to behave confidently. So according to research, athletes who behave or who look confident based on their body language are perceived as more likely to be successful. So by acting like a confident person, over time you will also start to think as well as feel like a confident person. So in psychology we refer to this phenomenon as embodied cognition. And it simply means that not only do you need to think confident to feel confident, but you also need to act confidently in order to think confidently. So when you act confidently, your body is actually telling your brain that you are confident, you are dominant, and you are ready to perform. So as you can see that by focusing on various best performances, by writing a narrative or a story about one best performance, and by behaving confidently or changing your body language, you can actually get in a physical and a mentally right state to perform at your best. The next resource I'm going to discuss is control. So to reiterate the importance of control, Marcus Aurelius, a 2nd century Roman emperor, said that you have control over your mind, but not over outside events. So the first important point is the controllables versus the uncontrollables. So in the performance environment, we need to acknowledge and accept that there are aspects that you cannot control. But more importantly is to acknowledge and accept that there are aspects that you can indeed control. So in essence, you can't control what the coach is thinking about you, whether you get into the team or not, whether you're going to get selected, whether you're going to get asked to do the penalty shootout or whatever the case may be. But on the other hand, you can control your internal experiences or in other words, your emotional control. The second important point is to focus on the controllables. So after acknowledging and after identifying the controllables, it's important that focusing on the aspects of our performance that we can control help us to focus on the right things, whilst also facilitating a sense of belief that performance is actually achievable. So thinking about and acting on controllables will help you to eliminate any focus on irrational, illogical, and unhelpful thinking, which are often created when we focus on the uncontrollable aspects of the performance environment. So although our brains are really amazingly created, we can't think about two things at the same time. So it just makes sense to focus on the controllables, and then you actually won't have the mental capacity to focus on the uncontrollables. And the third important point is to focus on the process. So However, focusing on aspects of your performance that you need to do to perform well, or in other words, your process goals, that will bring a sense of control and on most occasions lead to better performance. It therefore just makes sense to avoid wasting any mental energy and resources on the things which you cannot control, but rather become selfish in choosing the things to think about prior to, during, and following performance. So to control the controllables seems very simple, but how can we improve our be in control thinking? So based on research, there are 5 controllables that can be manipulated to enhance control over any performance situations. These 5 controllables are our psychological state, our preparation, effort, communication, and if-then plans. With regards to psychological state, the first one, the first step is to recognize and to deal with the thoughts that are trying to get in your way from getting into this winning mindset. There is very, very good evidence that state that merely trying to stop yourself from having a negative thought will actually increase the likelihood and the strength and intensity of that unwanted thought. So by merely suppressing a negative thought, you only bring more attention to that thought at times when you should actually be focusing on positive thoughts. So to demonstrate this effect, I'm quickly going to do a very brief cognitive experiment with you, and I'm going to ask you for the next only 15 seconds not to think of a pink elephant. So take a piece of paper and mark every time that you do think of a pink elephant for the next 15 seconds. Okay, if you're ready, go. And remember, whatever you're going to think of, do not think of a pink elephant. Okay. Did you think of a pink elephant? Nothing. So you distract yourself. Okay. But if you perhaps thought about a pink elephant, so that means that you focus so much not to think about that pink elephant that that picture came back more intensely. So this simple demonstration just shows you that by trying to suppress the pink elephant actually makes that image stronger and more persistent in the mind, since you are bringing much more attention to the thought in an attempt not to think about it. And that's exactly the same with a negative thought. So you're trying to suppress that thought and in effect turn your attention to that thought, and now you want to hope that thought just disappear. And that is not going to happen. The pink elephant pops up. The next underneath psychological state is to empty your head. So instead of trying to stop the negative thoughts by desperately telling yourself not to think about in that way, it's better to allow yourself having those thoughts at a specific time in the lead up to your competition or your performance. So by expressing that thought, instead of suppressing them, means that you are no longer wasting time and mental energy trying to battle or fight that negative thought. But it's very important, and keep in mind that you have to set aside a specific time in which you can let that thoughts happen, and preferably a safe time or safe distance from your actual performance. And then the third point under the psychological state refers to as triggers. So when you are in the moment just before your performance, you actually need only to think about what you need to do to perform well. So these positive thoughts can be triggered by key phrases or words that you have decisively associated to the positive thoughts and the feelings that will help you to perform. So specifically here, we are talking about allocating words to a specific thought, so that with that quick reminder of that one word, you can access the thought and let your mind drift into positivity. So the second controllable refers to preparation. So by engaging in a pre-performance routine brings consistency and controllability to our preparation. So it will foster confidence, it will develop a focus on relevant behavior, thoughts, and it will also bring in an element of control. So when you prepare well, you are unlikely to become distracted by external uncontrollable factors. It will help you to focus on key time points with specific and consistent thoughts and behaviors that will most likely contribute to your performance. And the key to make sure that our routines work well is to practice them. So it's not going to just be some miracle that's going to happen. You have to practice them, and preferably prior to a less important game or a training session. Then the third controllable refers to effort. So effort is a choice. And only you are the controller of when, how, and how much you are going to apply this effort. So you are going to decide how much time and energy you are going to devote to all aspects of your performance. So this is not the coach's responsibility. This is the athlete's responsibility. So even those who seem to have a natural gift have to work hard to succeed. So effort is a choice, and you either choose to work hard or not. The next important controllable is our communication. So to take control of our communication to maximize our own emotions, but also the emotions of those around you. So for example, the verbal and the non-verbal communication that you present prior to a stressful or a pressure event will have a very large effect on the thoughts, the feelings, as well as the behaviors of those listening to us. So on too many occasions, we have seen coaches deliver what they consider to be inspirational speeches prior to important sporting events, only to hear them use ironic statements such as, don't mess up, don't make this mistake, don't do that, don't do this. So consequently, they have actually inadvertently provided an ironic message that potentially reinforce negative thoughts and create intense stress for the athletes or the performers. And then the last controllable is the if-then plans. If-then plans help us to formulate how to achieve a desired goal in a specific and a controllable way. So the if part reflects an opportunity or an obstacle, and the then part reflects the goal-directed behavior in response to the if part. So for example, on approaching an important hockey game, you might say, if I feel nervous before the game, then I will remind myself I'm prepared and I'm actually a good hockey player. Or if I'm nervous, then I'm going to use visualization to boost my self-confidence. So by using the if-then plans, you are able not only to recognize your desire or your goal, but also to direct your behavior towards making that desire become a reality. The last resource I'm going to discuss is achievement goals. So how many times just before a game or during a team talk we hear, don't mess up, today I'm going to try not to do this, not to do that. Quite a lot of times if you ask me. So statements as above is referred to as setting an avoidance goal. So an avoidance goal incorporates a desire and an intention to avoid making a mistake, often accompanied by don't mess up statements alongside the overthinking of performance. So for example, an avoidance goal might be, in this tennis match, I'm going to try not to be inconsistent with my second serves. On the other hand, to an avoidance goal is an approach goal. So that means it's a desire or an intention to execute the skills you have control over and that you are confident in performing. So for example, an approach goal might be that in this game, I'm going to try to be consistent with my second serves. So it's just about linguistics. So there are a few strategies that you can use to focus on an approach goal. The first one is to think the right way and to avoid overthinking. So by overthinking well-rehearsed and learned skills under pressure, that leads to underperformance at a big event. So you know how to perform, you know what your core skills are, but when overthinking these elements, by breaking it down, you actually disrupt the mechanics of those skills and also performing in a way that is very odd to your brain. So this is what we as psychologists refer to as paralysis by analysis. So I'm briefly going to discuss 4 techniques that you can use and help your athletes to counter paralysis by analysis. The first one is to think simple. Keep it simple. So simplify your thoughts into a single focus. So moments before the execution of a skill, simplify the complexity of performance under pressure. So for example, a golfer may use some key swing thoughts that direct the action of the swing without being too prescriptive. So for example, they might use the word smooth as they approach a drive, or nice and easy when they approach a putt. The second one is don't say don't. As soon as you hear the word don't, it immediately turns your focus to the possible potential failures. So when we are under pressure, what actually happens is the brain doesn't really understand the word don't and interprets the word as do. So avoid the use of don't statements and focus on the things that you need to do to perform well. In other words, focus on your process or your approach goals. Prepare for unwanted thoughts by trying to suppress the thoughts. We saw in the previous cognitive experiment, it's not going to help you. So it's going to make the image stronger and more persistent in your mind. So when those unwanted thoughts crop up in your mind, and they surely will, replace them with images and thoughts of what you need to do or focus on your process goals. So to make sure this is going to happen, plan your thoughts so that you know that when an unwanted thought crops up, you have a ready replacement for it. So don't wait for the competition and think it's going to happen miraculously. It's something that you need to practice to become more automatic. So in performance situations, instead of trying not to think of potential failures, visualize yourself doing the things you need to do to perform well. And the last one is to empty your head. So to express these unwanted and negative thoughts a safe distance from your performance. So with that, you are removing the need to actually suppress them. So in performance situations, you are less likely to experience the rebound effect. That means when you suppress the thought, it comes back stronger. So because you have not suppressed any unwanted thoughts in the first place. So just to conclude, so from this presentation, it's clear that you can actually learn to tip the balance from a threat state to a challenge state. And by teaching yourself or to enhance your self-confidence, by visualizing various best performances, one great performance, and also by behaving confidently, to recognize the uncontrollable aspect and focus on the aspects of your performance that you can control, and lastly, to focus on what you need to do to perform well. So to teach your athletes to set approach goals instead of avoidance goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kruger. It was an excellent presentation, and thanks a lot for all the good advice that you give the athletes and even the coaches and everyone listening. Are there any questions? Anybody that, Gary, do we have any questions coming up?
At the moment, we do not have any questions. We've sent a request for people to type questions. But if there's anyone who wants to ask an in-person question, just raise your hand and we will activate your microphone and your video so that you can ask Prof a question. So far, okay. There's 2 questions in the house, okay.
We have a question there from Professor Nell.
Hi, Prof. Hello, you can hear. That was an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
And you've got to the visualization. I mean, that's perfect. I think I mentioned something like that on somebody else's. What I wanted to ask you is, you've obviously have been teaching things for some time. You're not old, I hasten to add, but you have. I've just wondered, this is about, lifespan really. You know that it's the same when you teach anybody anything, even clinical counseling students. If you get them and they're very introverted, you have to say to them, look, if you're going into academia and even seeing clients, you need to develop some form of extroversion. And often they do, but their base personality, the base characteristic is an introvert. But over time, that extroversion think of David Beckham in sport. He was not really much of an extrovert at the beginning of his career, but we won't say what happened to him, but yeah, he's now fairly extroverted. But I just wonder, over lifespan, if they recognize that sometimes they have to get back to the person within, if you like, otherwise they become too much. They have so in Beckham's case, it might be too much plastic surgery involved in things he really doesn't know a lot about. And that happens with film stars and athletes as well, actually. I just wondered if there's any mechanism, or they ever get told, well, look, you have to do this because you will perform better, people will listen more. However, at some point, you also have to recognize that you're not a true extrovert. It's just something that I've been thinking about over the years. But, I mean, you may not even meet it, but really a great presentation.
Thank you very much, Prof.
Was there, Professor Nell, was there any question that you actually put? Okay.
Boxers. You can look at Mike Tyson and his life. How after they become to the top of their sport, suddenly they don't recognize themselves anymore. I'm just wondering if there's any built-in mechanism for people, or to be told that you mustn't lose who you are.
Okay, we have it. Can they use anything else except the good advice that you gave us here in your presentation?
I'm a bit confused now, but anyway.
No.
I think it's very important to keep personality obviously in mind, but I always tell my clients that sport psychological skills are, as it says, skills. So you can learn to use it, but say for instance, one athlete is not very comfortable with, say for instance, visualization, then we can try something else, keeping that person's personality in mind.
No, it's okay.
No, it's fine, it's fine.
But I suggest that you speak to Ankebe in private, because we still have some other questions waiting. And there we have Professor Leon van Niekerk.
Okay, yes, thank you so much, Ankebe, for a very good presentation. Really appreciate it. I'm just thinking about coaches in the Eastern Cape and athletes in the Eastern Cape not having access to sports psychology and those kind of resources. Are there resources on the internet, for instance, or otherwise available for them to maybe latch onto ideas like visualization or relaxation that they can teach the athletes there? And up to what point do they have to teach that skill until they can use it in a specific game or in their preparation for a specific event? If you can just elaborate a bit more on that, thanks.
Thanks, Prof. Leon. Yeah, I don't have specific resources now on top of my head, but yeah, if you put into the internet or on Google mental skills, you'll get a lot of different ideas. And yeah, as I've said previously, it's a skill, so you can teach that skill. So in my opinion, you don't need to be a psychologist to teach mental skills in sport. But yeah, obviously there's a fine line of where you have to refer your client, say for instance, it becomes clinical. So yeah, I think any coach can learn how to teach that skills, and starting in practice and building up that skills, using it in less important competitions, more important competitions. So just maybe to use a certain structure of how you're going to learn anything else. So say for instance a physical skill. You're not going to let your athlete now learn something new and apply it tomorrow in a very important game. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, I think the internet is full of different ideas and resources one can use. But yeah, as I've said, I don't have specific websites or resources now on top of my head.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ankebe. Are there any other questions that came up? No, there are no other questions, so thank you again. It was an absolute excellent presentation, and this is the end for the Thursday presentations. Please log in again on Friday and enjoy some more knowledgeable presentations. Thank you to you. Goodbye.